if we're talking about collaboration and what makes virtual worlds a good place for collaboration, this is actually the nexus of my PhD research I'm doing at Smart Lab, which is what is it about these environments that make them especially well suited for collaboration, and how does that differ from other tools out there, and what can we do, what's unlocked in these virtual worlds that you can just not do as easily over distance. And so a couple of the things that are coming out in the research is this notion of presence and co-presence. The fact that we feel like we're in the space together is a feeling that you don't get with video conferencing, or maybe a little bit to a lesser degree, and certainly not with 2D app sharing desktop tools like WebEx or GoToMeeting, these kinds of things. The value of being in the virtual world is that you all see each other and you see what each other are looking at and where the attention is. It's great for having that cohesion. And what I think and others think is that it's that feeling of being there that helps you get further faster, in part. The other things that a virtual world unlocks in terms of collaboration features is the ability for us to view multiple screens at the same time, or even 3D data sets and interact with this. Whereas other tools, especially video conferencing, very hard to share media. And with desktop sharing, you're really only looking at one screen at a time, but this way you can show a lot of different screens. From us as developers, providers of these virtual worlds, there's a lot of room for creativity, not just creative problem solving on the engineering side, but even the graphics. If you're trying to interpret what the client wants in terms of what their virtual boardroom should look like, and there's a lot of room for creativity in that. And we look for, in our modelers, creativity, but also a grounding in the real world. For example, we've worked with some modelers who we think may have never stepped foot in a corporate environment because their first builds were not, just weren't that close. Similarly, different types of clothing would be more appropriate or less appropriate in different settings. But in terms of the spaces themselves enabling creativity, because it's so easy to communicate in these things where you can actually, you just push to talk, you're simply talking, your avatars, and at least in our virtual world, has automated gestures, so expressing yourself is easy. The ability to bring in any media that you have to share your work, whether it's highly creative work or whatever it is, it's easy to share. So they can be creative, collaborative environments quite easily that way. What's different between enterprise virtual worlds and a social virtual world, specifically like Second Life, a lot of the focus is around building things, so you're really expressing yourself by building things. In the enterprise space, end users aren't building anything. You might have instructors that pull together course materials, but the end users are there to learn, collaborate, work together, and so they express themselves differently. We're finally at the point where all of the PCs that are purchased will actually run this stuff, whereas that wasn't true 3 years ago. You had a lot of legacy gear that just simply wouldn't run this. For the most part, most of the IT equipment in schools and businesses are good to go. Some of the challenges of working in a virtual environment are just it's not just around getting acclimated and navigating around, but it's thinking differently about how you can present information, how you can support learning. We went from slides to what became PowerPoint, and soon we heard death by PowerPoint. We can have, of course, death by virtual PowerPoint as well. So how do you make the learning actually engaging? And it's not just about the display of information in a 3D environment. So one of the challenges is simply taking the time to learn the nuances and restructure learning and meetings and that kind of thing. It's also simply, there is a bit about getting acclimated as well. And the same feelings that you have in the real world in terms of proximity, and how close should you be to somebody, and how do you gesture, how do you, how best to interact in these environments is something that's learned, and you can learn it really fast, but the first few times in there may not feel so natural. Some of the technology advances in virtual worlds are increasing realism and fidelity, and it's not just the graphics, and there's a lot of different experimentation with getting higher res imagery in these environments, but it's also the avatar technology, which really hasn't evolved that much since There and Second Life were launched in 2003. So with this particular one, with all of the avatars have automated gestures and lip sync and this kind of thing, and that's helpful, but it hasn't evolved to be matched to your real world activities. So how are you really feeling? So in Olive, for example, if you're feeling angry, you have to push a button that says angry for your avatar to show that you're angry. Or happy, whatever the emotion, it's not automatically triggered. Well, there is software out there, this middleware, that actually does automate some of those gestures. And in a virtual environment, if we have, say, 10 avatars around a virtual table, if there's a noise in the room or somebody starts speaking, all 10 of us manually need to move our mouse and our look around to look at that. But there's ways of automating that. So technology developments that are interesting, so you've got our avatar fidelity, how well they're expressing what you're really feeling and thinking and reacting to events in the virtual world. Graphics, already we've got data interoperability. 3D data sets are now visible in the virtual worlds. There's a couple products that helps facilitate that. What's missing with those, and where I hope my research contributes, is being able to interact with data in much more meaningful ways collaboratively. And I think that's going to unlock entire new ways of working in virtual worlds. So another range of technologies that are rapidly developing. You've got gestural interfaces using camera tracking or the Wii remote. These kinds of things have been used with our virtual world and others already, of looking at what's the most natural way of interacting. We've done silly things like tape a Wii remote to somebody's head, so to do head tracking that way with the lowest cost. There's also different types of headsets that'll help you visualize the virtual world just with goggles, so you don't need a mouse and a keyboard. They also do head tracking, and that can track your avatars that others are seeing across distance. The research into better gestures, moving away from mouse and keyboard, is exciting. And I think that just as we're seeing breakthroughs in gaming technologies, I think we'll see those, and that's the birth of enterprise virtual worlds anyway, that we'll see those trickle into the environment, into the working environment, but it's going to take some time. Right now, each of these requires a little piece of hardware, even if it's a webcam and some software. Getting everybody simply in the enterprise space to just buy the headsets has been a challenge, let alone trying to add another peripheral for better interactivity. But what we'll see is, we're looking at this from 10 years out, what we'll see is that the kit that people are buying for the day-to-day working will fully enable gestural interfaces and this collaborative 3D working, and it'll have to be built in. It won't be successful if it's a add-on like it is now with these new products like Connect, for example. So I have some examples of how virtual worlds, private, secure virtual worlds, have been used in schools, and some work done out of the U.S., for example. It was looking at kids, troubled teens, teens that have had trouble staying out of jail, for example, and you're not your easiest people to work with. A published study found that working in a virtual world to learn motor skills like CPR and the process around emergency response for that, and was quite successful. So targeting, reaching hard-to-reach kids in this way, there's a few studies about that that have been successful. What's different between virtual worlds, enterprise virtual worlds, and social virtual worlds is you can certainly mix kids in a private setting, so you can have adults and kids securely interacting. You could even have adults playing the kids' roles for training of teachers even. And so it unlocks, when you move away from some of the dangers of being online publicly and you have a secure environment, it unlocks a ton of different learning possibilities. So there's been a lot of studies of modeling some great place to go on virtual safari and experimenting with that kind of experiential learning. I'd love to see a lot more experiential learning. So we can model anything. We can transplant kids. We can have kids transplanted to the savannah and have the kids that are actually living near a savannah actually interacting with people in real time. We're not seeing enough of, seeing a little bit of transporting people to different locations, but not interacting with the people that would be at those locations. And I think that's a real opportunity. And there's so many opportunities to do more than to have a virtual sage on the stage with kids, and we're just scratching the surface of what this learning looks like. Well, skills that are needed to work in this new environment. So there's a couple different types of skills. One is the people that are helping support and build these types of environments, and those are very similar to your game development skills now, math, science, physics, these kinds of things, modeling. I think 3D modeling, the tools will get better. I think that it'll become almost like desktop publishing at some point. So I think that there's an opportunity for people to be better versed in how to express themselves and express concepts in 3D. That spatial understanding, spatial reasoning, those types of skills I think will be important going forward as we change the interface from 2D to 3D. I think that'll be important. In terms of working in these environments and learning in these environments, I think that there's the same things that we're all trying to teach now, which is collaboration skills. And this is bigger in some cultures than others, but how do you collaboratively learn together? How is that mediated with technology? And kids are already really adept at forming partnerships with people in online game environments and collaborating in that way. I think that will translate into the workforce, and that we could tap into that.